This episode is brought to you by my friends at Patreon. If you'd like to join them and get early audios of upcoming episodes, please see the link in the description. Lise Meitner's discovery of fission caused quite a few red faces, at least among those self-aware enough to be conscious of their own folly. Enrico Fermi, who had won a Nobel Prize in 1938 for his supposed discovery of transuranes, chided himself for missing the obvious, though in truth it wasn't entirely his fault. Had he continued in his research, then it is possible he might have discovered fission himself. But Mussolini, following in the footsteps of Hitler, dispersed his working group and stalled Italian progress on nuclear physics. Still, Fermi then went on to create the first ever nuclear chain reaction, which caused Lise to slap her own forehead. Hahn and Lise could not publish together, for obvious reasons, but more pointedly, Lise felt that she had to be guarded in what she revealed in her correspondence, for fear of it being intercepted. When Hahn finally published his paper acknowledging the existence of nuclear fission, he didn't credit Lise, which devastated her. She understood why. He could not openly share his discovery with a Jew, but it was the opening of a rift between them that would only widen with time. For the rest of his life, Hahn would consider his fantasy to be the true discovery of fission, even though, because he had employed atomic mass rather than atomic number, he had failed to grasp its true mechanism, a mistake even Einstein found risible. In his paper publishing his results, Hahn committed his first true sin against Lise, claiming that his work had been completed by the time Frisch and Lise's paper had been published, when in fact his proof of fission had been instigated by it. Lise's other personal relationships were equally fraught. Manne Siegbahn, the man to whom Lise owed her continued existence, continued to allow her only that. When, in an attempt at bridge building, Lise had asked Hahn to send him a particle counter, she received from him not only no thank you, but in fact no word at all. "It is all very depressing," she wrote, "but I see no possibility of changing it." In truth, her situation was bleaker even than that. Though officially neutral, Sweden was culturally tied to Germany. Swedes did not fully switch allegiances until it was clear the Germans could never win. There was little history of Sweden taking in refugees, and little sympathy for the Jews who were there. There was some good news. Jutz had been released from Dachau, and he and Gusti had received Swedish visas, meaning her inner circle was reassembling, if only slightly. But like distant fiery clouds, ideas were forming. Later that year, Otto Frisch would become the first to observe the energy released from a single fission of uranium. If a single uranium atom could release 200 mega-electron volts of energy, then a kilogram of uranium contained enough energy to destroy a large city. In 1940, Frisch and his colleague at the University of Birmingham, Rudolf Perls, realized the possibility of a nuclear chain reaction. One neutron bullet splitting one atom produces enough energy to release more neutron bullets, splitting more atoms, resulting in what the duo called a superbomb, with the explosive power of 1,000 tons of dynamite. As with most predictions of nuclear yield, they massively undershot reality. At the time, Hahn, at least, saw little danger from fission. The machinery required to sustain a chain reaction was too complex, he argued, and uranium-235, its fissile isotope, was too rare. That, at least, was true enough. A metric ton of pure uranium, refined from about 1.5 tons of pitchblende, would produce just 7.5 kilograms of uranium-235, assuming, of course, that you could extract it, which no one, at the time, knew how to do. But history was rolling forward regardless. The German annexation of the Sudetenland not only brought the world unwittingly closer to war, but also brought the Wackenstahl mine, the largest source of uranium in Europe, under the control of the Nazis, who promptly impounded it. Meanwhile, progress on fission was, if you'll pardon the metaphor, exploding. Again and again, supposed transuranic elements were found to be various products of fission. But the farther physicists advanced in the field, the farther Hahn, a chemist, was distanced from it. His determination was not only that he, but chemistry, had discovered fission, and to assert that, he had to downplay, at first only in his mind, the role of Lise in establishing its theoretical basis. Hahn's reasons were not entirely unconscionable. He was a non-Nazi in a Nazi-dominated institute. If he could secure fission as his and only his discovery, it might provide him with enough shielding to keep him employed. Or alive. He needn't have worried. The possibility of a nuclear bomb ensured his continued employment. Lise herself was not immune from this. When Ida Nodak began demanding, correctly, that she be credited with conceiving nuclear fission, Lise declared her assertions meaningless, and even resorted to name-calling. In July 1939, Lise went to Cambridge, partly to see her family, most of whom had emigrated to England by this point, and partly to investigate an offer of a 3-year contract at the Cavendish Laboratory. Unfortunately, before she could finalize the move, World War II broke out, stranding her in Sweden. "If I had a talent for regret," she wrote later, "I would not be able to get over the fact that I returned to Stockholm from Cambridge." Her position thus remained as bleak as ever. "Just to keep busy, I did some experiments with the rare earth," she wrote. "I'm not very interested in it, but one must do something. All day long I sit alone in my workroom, and for days I do not speak a word. In this way, one has plenty of time to think over the world's situation. A good method for staying slender." Her situation did, however, make her an ideal go-between for Hahn on German fission developments, and between von Laue and his son in the United States. In April 1940, Lise traveled once again to Copenhagen, counting on the goodwill of Niels Bohr to allow her access to his cyclotron. Unfortunately, just days later, Germany, who had signed a 10-year non-aggression pact with Denmark, invaded, conquering the country within an hour. Lise was once again a German Jew trapped in German territory. Thankfully, Jews were given a momentary amnesty, and she was able to leave for Stockholm. The Danish government did as much as they could to complicate her return, despite special papers having been granted to her from Sweden. That year, over in America, atomic physics was buzzing. In 1939, at the Berkeley Radiation Laboratory at the University of California, bombardment of uranium with neutrons, a not uncommon event at this point, produced something strange. A substance with a half-life of 2.3 days. Hope sprang for the first genuine transuranic element. Element 93, if it existed, should have chemical properties similar to rhenium. But when Emilio Segri reacted it with hydrogen fluoride, he found that it was not similar to rhenium at all. Segri and his colleagues titled the paper announcing the discovery, "An Unsuccessful Search for Transuranium Elements." In 1940, Philip H. Abelson of the Carnegie Institution realized that the substance, whatever it was, did not behave like any other element, and in fact was more like uranium than anything else. Further analysis showed that it had to be derived from uranium, and was, finally, without question, a true transuranic element. Element 93. Given that uranium had been named for the planet Uranus, it only made sense to christen its brother Neptunium. But if it was element 93, why did it not behave like rhenium? In 1944, Glenn Seaborg realized that, rather than belonging to established chemical families like the halogens or noble gases, the elements surrounding uranium form their own separate block of the periodic table, now known as the F block, and usually found tucked under most modern periodic tables. Ecarhenium is in fact element 107, not 93, and was found, or more accurately made, in 1981. Its name, chosen in 1997, is bohrium. Trapped in Stockholm, cut off from Bohr's cyclotron, Lise could only watch in silent fury. She had isolated a material that she was convinced was a transuranic element, but without a neutron source, she couldn't prove it. Until her dying day, Lise Meitner would rue her failure to find element 93. All she had was work, and she could barely do that. Even when the Nobel Institute's cyclotron was completed, she could not use it as a neutron source. Siegbahn had an autocratic personality and demanded deference, something Lise simply could not give him. Not that Lise had little else to occupy her. It was 1940. Former havens like Denmark, the Netherlands, and France were now under Nazi rule. The Koster family, who had sheltered her in the Netherlands, wrote with unnervingly joyful gratitude for the few scraps of food she was able to send them. Even Britain, her family's sanctuary, was under threat. Lise had no money, so she could not sponsor refugees, but after contacting Jewish and women's organizations, managed to raise £50 to rescue Hedwig Kohn, an old university friend who was, along with Lise, one of only 3 women to obtain a postdoctorate degree in Germany. Hedwig eventually reached the United States, but only after traveling the long way round, including Siberia and the Pacific. Lise's attempt to rescue Stefan Meyer, however, failed. By the time she had secured a position in Sweden, he was trapped. In 1941, the final solution was enacted. In 1943, the amnesty for Danish Jews was revoked, and Niels Bohr was forced to flee his home, first on a fishing boat, then on a de Havilland Mosquito, where an ill-fitting oxygen mask caused him to nearly asphyxiate. His wife, Margarita, much to Lise's delight, stayed in Stockholm, but Bohr and his son, along with Otto Frisch, were shunted on to the United States, where they suddenly went inexplicably quiet. The reason why seems self-evident now. What many still considered an impossibility was already taking shape. Otto Hahn, Carl Friedrich von Weizsäcker, and Werner Heisenberg had already been secreted away to begin the Nazi fission project. Many in the atomic physics community were pondering the wisdom of publishing their results. When Emilio Segre and Glenn Seaborg discovered plutonium in 1941, the stakes were raised even higher. Plutonium could be made from uranium-238, the most common isotope of uranium, and in reasonable quantities, provided one possessed a nuclear reactor. Lise herself was offered a position at Los Alamos, prospect of release from purgatory. Not only would she have a fulfilling job, but she would be reunited with her beloved Otto Frisch and Niels Bohr. Her response is now iconic. "I will have nothing to do with a bomb." A reasonable position today, perhaps, but radical then. Most Allied scientists, and nearly all Jewish scientists, considered the development of a nuclear bomb before the Nazis to be of existential importance. Lise's pacifism as regards her calling speaks to her first-hand horror of the effects of Fritz Haber's weapons during World War I, and also, perhaps, to her occasionally excessive principles. Lise remained an important vector of news from Germany, not only of their nascent nuclear program, to which Hahn and Werner Heisenberg were now central, but to the trickle of rumors of the increasing atrocities committed behind the line. Lise was adamant that all Germans, good and bad, Nazi supporters and not, should bear some responsibility for the horrors committed. Hahn and even von Laue, who had always openly opposed Nazism, considered her opinion unjust. But Planck, perhaps surprisingly, agreed. "Terrible things must happen to us," he wrote to Lise in 1943. "We have done the most horrible things." Terrible things did happen, at least to Lise's circle of friends. Hahn's son and her godson, Hanno, lost an arm on the Eastern Front. Planck's son, Erwin, was captured and tortured in 1944 in response to the plot to assassinate Hitler, and executed a year later. Of her other friends, the Kosters, Elisabeth Schliemann, Stefan Meyer, Lise had no idea if they were even alive. As the Nazi regime crumbled, news finally broke. The Kosters, for all the suffering they had endured, were safe, though their son had been imprisoned for a time. Meyer had managed to survive by hiding in his vacation home. His brother's entire family, however, had been exterminated. On the 8th of August, 1945, the radio announced to the world that the first atomic bomb had been used in war. In minutes, the entire city of Hiroshima had ceased to exist. Lise had known nothing of this. Upon refusing to aid the bomb's development, she had been comprehensively shut out. Hearing the news with the rest of the world, Lise stood up, opened her door, and walked. And walked. For 5 hours. Whether in rage or in silence, she never recorded. On that walk, Lise pondered if she held some responsibility for this horror, or what she could or should have done. Then she remembered her answer to Fritz Haber, when he had asked her the same question as his chemical weapons ravaged the fields of the Somme. It is war itself that is terrible, and perhaps once into war, committed to serve its ends, every action we take is an evil one, the evil differing only in degree. Lise came to a conclusion. She had contributed nothing to that explosion, and she'd be damned if she contributed to any in the media. When she returned and found dozens of phone messages waiting, she realized she had no choice. "A lot of nonsense will surely be printed," she wrote in her diary. "Everyone I spoke to understood nothing about it." Lise came to a hard realization. Whether or not she had participated in the bomb's development, she was one of a tiny number of people who understood what had just occurred. She needed to stem the tide of lies that were sure to follow. So she wrote an article. It was futile. The press were already camping out on her doorstep. "They followed me when I tried to escape," she wrote later, "and neglecting all my protest, took the silliest snapshots. When she refused to give interviews, they made them up." Soon the story of the fleeing Jewess, who had been ordered to hand the secrets of the bomb to Hitler, but instead fled with them to Denmark, handed them to her friend, Otto Frisch, who passed them to his father-in-law, Niels Bohr, became a legend, despite being a lie from start to finish. Lise hadn't fled of her own volition. She had fled for her life. She had no secrets. Everything she discovered was openly published. And when she made her discovery, she was already in exile. The legend had no room for Otto Hahn, who was made a Nazi. On the 10th of August, Lise was informed that she would be interviewed on the radio by Eleanor Roosevelt. Yes, the now widow of the U.S. president wished to make a live bid for global girl power. Lise felt sick. She had never fully mastered English and had no idea what questions would even be asked. "I am not important," she declared to NBC. "I have not worked on any bomb. Why do you want to interview me?" It didn't help when Eleanor opened her introduction with the fleeing Jewess story. Lise complained that she only understood half of Eleanor's English, and that she was too close to the microphone, and that she spoke too softly. But the New York Times recap suggests she expressed her view with admirable clarity. "I hope the construction of the atom bomb will help not only to finish this awful war, but that we will be able to use its great energy for peaceful work. I hope that by cooperation of several nations, it will be possible to come to better relations between the nations and to prevent such horrible things as we've had to go through in the last few years." A second interview, in which she attempted to clear Hahn of his Nazi allegations, went better, as her sister, who lived in New York, was in the studio. It was the first time she had heard her voice in years. The press now had a mascot, the Jewish Mother of the Bomb, a title that hurt Lise in multiple ways. First, she had had nothing to do with the development of the bomb. Second, she had not wanted to contribute to the bomb. And finally, despite being Jewish enough for Hitler, she had never felt Jewish herself. She had been raised atheist and had, after some consideration, possibly inspired by the character of Max Planck, converted to Lutheranism. Upon her embrace by the Jews of America, she felt like an imposter. The end of the war had brought one fact into harsh clarity. Lise had no home. She was a Swede who wasn't Swedish, a German who wasn't German, and a Jew who wasn't Jewish. A version of her was famous throughout the world, but the real her was alone. Otto Hahn, for one, was furious at the attention Lise was receiving. Increasingly, he saw the discovery of fission as his and his alone, rewriting history in his own mind, perhaps even to the point at which he believed it. Professor Meitner had left Berlin half a year prior to the discovery, he wrote later, and did not participate in the discovery. He had arguably had a better war than Lise. As the Allies closed in, they swept up anyone involved in the Nazi nuclear effort, and shunted them all to a very comfortable prison, Farm Hall near Cambridge, where they engaged in self-pitying ruminations, all recorded for the joy of their Jewish jailer. "He can't quite get over the fact that we killed his parents," one is recorded saying. The 10 corralled scientists comprised not only Otto Hahn, but Carl Friedrich von Weizsäcker, his anointed successor for Lise, Max von Laue, and, of course, Werner Heisenberg. Like everyone else, they heard of the bombing of Hiroshima over the radio. Unlike everyone else, they didn't believe it. It was propaganda, they declared. A super-powerful conventional bomb they're pretending is atomic. Lise's contacts in Germany had continuously informed her that the team had not managed to isolate uranium-235, but she consistently wondered if they found an alternative. In fact, they had made no progress at all, not even to a reactor. How could they, the cream of German scientific talent, be so inept when those they had exiled had managed to do what they could not? "If the Americans really have a uranium bomb," said Hahn, "then you're all second-raters." Poor old Heisenberg. It was here that a comforting myth began to take shape. One that absolved them not only of sin, but of incompetence. It wasn't that they couldn't develop a bomb, it was that they didn't want to. They deliberately stymied the progress of the bomb to ensure that Hitler never attained it. Heisenberg spent the remainder of his life attempting to wash himself of Nazi associations, claiming he was an inner exile who had attempted to ban research into atomic weapons. Lise, for one, never bought it, and later historians were able to show that not only had Heisenberg done nothing to hinder a Nazi bomb, there was little he could have done in any case. As for his not being a Nazi, that was technically true, and he was not a party member, but he had acted as a cultural ambassador to the Nazi regime multiple times, and had even parroted Nazi lies. He once argued that the purpose of the Cold War was to prevent Europe being attacked by the Russians, quote, "just as we were attacked." It was Germany who invaded Russia, Werner. Max von Laue, on the other hand, annoyed the others by his mere presence, as he was a constant reminder that it was possible to survive the Third Reich without being morally compromised. In 1946, Otto Hahn finally received the Nobel Prize in Chemistry he had been awarded in 1944 for the discovery of nuclear fission, much to the fury of Lise Meitner's friends and colleagues. It is tempting to blame Lise Meitner's exclusions from the Nobel on her being a woman, or a Jew. But both those things were true of Marie Curie, and she won 2 Nobels. The precise reasons for Lise's exclusion are still debated today, but the simplest answer is that, as an exile, she could not defend her contribution. The old barrier between chemistry and physics meant that the Nobels were ill-suited to rewarding interdisciplinary work. By a toxic twist of fate, Mana Siegbahn, who still saw her as a burden, was on the awarding committee. Otto Hahn, who had long since divorced himself from Lise, had outright lied about her contributions, even claiming that if she had remained in Germany, she would have stopped him from discovering fission. In his Nobel acceptance speech, he referred to her as his employee. When asked to reflect on his life's work, he made no mention of their 30 years together. As Otto Hahn's stature in post-war Germany grew, so Sweden's deference to him increased, as the old cultural ties between the two nations were re-established. Insofar as it was possible for Lise, she was bitterly insulted by this treatment. But she had a momentary reprieve in January 1946, when she was offered a visiting professorship at the Catholic University in Washington, D.C. Upon arrival, the pioneer contributor to the atomic bomb was so overwhelmed by the press that she momentarily stepped back into the plane. But, after the tiny 67-year-old woman had been hurled between gaggles of pressmen, she suddenly found herself in the arms of her sisters Lola and Frida, as well as Otto Frisch, who had journeyed 2 straight days from Los Alamos to see her. For the first time in 8 years, Lise Meitner was happy. Her time in America was a chance to meet old friends. Albert Einstein, Wolfgang Pauli, Erwin Schrödinger, and Hedwig Kohn, the woman whose life Lise very likely saved, all received visits on her tour. The only blemish on the tour, apart from all the press attention, was when she was handed a script for a film based on the events leading up to the development of the bomb. The script had swallowed the fleeing Jewish story hook, line, and sinker. When asked if she wished to be a character in the film, she replied, "I'd rather walk naked down Broadway." In Germany, the occupation was proving brutal. A number of Lise's old colleagues had already succumbed to malnutrition. Otto Hahn, fresh from his Nobel win, saw himself as the spokesperson for the new Germany and its woes. It was one thing for him to complain to the Allied authorities about the lack of food, the cold, and the misery of his people. But when he claimed that the Germans had suffered under the Allies just as the Poles had suffered under the Germans, Lise broke. "How shall the world trust a new Germany," she wrote to Hahn, "when its best and intellectually most prominent people do not have the insight to understand that they share responsibility for the horrible crimes Germany has committed, and do not have a burning desire to make whatever amends are possible?" The unfolding horrors of the Holocaust were a nightmare from which Lise could not wake. She wrote, "Why go on is a question I asked myself often enough, especially in the early years in Stockholm. And for 1,000,000 people with the same question, a horrible death cut off any answer. I cannot ever forget that." Germany, the land Lise loved, was, as far as she could see, gone. Hahn may have been capable of moral amnesia, but Lise was not. It is possible a reminder of his culpability deepened his already intense resentment of her. In 1947, weary of Siegbahn's treatment of her, Lise's friends arranged a place for her at Sweden's Royal Institute of Technology. For the first time since before her exile, Lise was treated with the respect she deserved. She had a laboratory, assistants, and all the necessary equipment. She was finally able to return to her one true passion, pursuing unanswered questions from before the war, as well as providing theoretical work for Sweden's first nuclear reactor. But she still felt alone, and an alien in a country that mistrusted her. That little bit of self-confidence that the Berlin colleagues, above all Ewan Planck, worked so hard to instill in me, she wrote to James Frank, the Swedes have driven out. Her only regular correspondence from people outside her immediate circle was from Germans desperate for her attestation of their lack of Nazi sympathies. When one such letter came from Kurt Hess, of all people, she refused to answer. In October 1947, Max Planck died. To most people, he was an icon of the era of scientific advancement, a name on par with Einstein. To Lise, he was a friend, mentor, and father figure, from whom she had drawn many of her moral certainties. His memorial service was the first time Lise had set foot in Germany in nearly a decade, and as she wandered the streets of Berlin, she saw every face hiding a decade of guilt, and knew she could never live there again. It wasn't all bad. When she returned to the Kaiser Wilhelm Institute, now the Max Planck Institute, she was genuinely touched when in Bonn, old students and colleagues welcomed her with open arms. In 1949, Lise and Hahn received the Max Planck Medal, which pleased her greatly, not only in memoriam of her friend, but also because it was the first recognition she had received from Germany. That same year, Lise was granted Swedish citizenship, and in 1951, she became a full member of the Swedish Royal Academy of Sciences, a position which allowed her a taste of retribution by granting her Nobel awarding rights. In 1954, at the age of 75, Lise entered semi-retirement at the nuclear laboratory of Sigvard Eklund, where she attended colloquia and read papers. She called it an old folks' home. In 1955, in what must have seemed savage irony, she became the first recipient of the Otto Hahn Prize. That same year, von Laue asked if she could give a dedication to the newly restored Otto Hahn building, the same building in which she and he had worked side by side for 30 years. Unsurprisingly, she refused. In recompense, von Laue suggested she be granted a new nuclear research facility in Wannsee, though it was ultimately named the Hahn Meitner Institute. In 1958, at the age of 80, Lise returned to the U.S., giving a series of lectures at Bryn Mawr Women's College, where she often became a mentor to the students who had accosted her during breaks on the university stairs. In 1960, Lise retired completely and relocated to Cambridge to be near Otto Frisch, the closest person she had to a son. By this point, Otto Hahn's erasure of her was nearly complete. The German people, Hahn represented all that was good in their nation. A veteran, a nationalist but not a Nazi, and of course, a Nobel laureate. So when he set about annihilating her legacy, the German people followed suit. When the first nuclear-powered ship was constructed in Germany in 1964, it was christened the Otto Hahn. Hahn himself was asked to launch it, though Lise noted that, for all his jubilation, he seemed old and tired. His son Hanno had died 2 years earlier in a motorcycle accident. Why someone with one arm deigned to ride a motorcycle in the first place is an open question. And that, together with his mentally deteriorating wife, seemed to trigger in him a morbid fascination with his own death, to which he succumbed in 1968, just 3 months before Lise herself. Lise died on the 27th of October, 1968, 11 days short of her 90th birthday. In keeping with her life's theme of dislocation, her grave lies not in Vienna, nor Berlin, nor even Stockholm, but Bromley, in Hampshire. Her epitaph reads, Lise Meitner, a physicist who never lost her humanity. Lise Meitner's name was never writ in water. In her lifetime, she had become a legend to a population awed by the power of the bomb, even if she never wished it. And while Hahn's attempts to wash her from history worked for a while, by the early 1980s, a concerted effort began to re-establish her place in the story of atomic physics. Element 109, just 2 places ahead of her friend, Niels Bohr, is named Meitnerium. Hahnium had been proposed for element 105, but rejected. In 2010, the Otto Hahn building that Meitner refused to consecrate was renamed the Hahn Meitner Building, and several lectures and prizes have been named in her honor as well. Still, unlike Marie Curie, her legend seems to have faded. I hope I have managed to lend a spark to that legend, at least for a while.